Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to the Sports Spectrum podcast. My name is Jason Romano. Great to have you joining us here on the program today. As always, check out our podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, everywhere podcasts are found. You can also download this podcast, subscribe to this podcast, and we would love to have you leave a review on iTunes if you like what you've heard. Just go to the iTunes Apple Podcast app, click the review button, leave a review, and there it is. It just gives us an opportunity to have more people find out about this podcast, the intersection of sports and faith. And of course, all of our content can be found at sportspectrum.com. Today on the podcast, we have a conversation with former NFL linebacker Chris Draft. And I really didn't have much background on Chris. I remember him playing and certainly being an NFL fan, watching him play for the few teams that he did with the Bears and the 49ers, the Falcons, the Panthers, the Rams, the Bills, and the Redskins. Originally out of Stanford, drafted in the 6th round of the 1998 NFL draft. Had a nice career, played for a long time. But I didn't really know Chris's journey. And I found myself at a conference, Super Bowl weekend in Atlanta, hosted by Chris Broussard and his King Ministries movement that he had. And Chris was one of the speakers there. And I was just blown away by this man's testimony, how powerful of a speaker he was, the passion that he had for his faith and for others. And I just said, let me get this guy on the podcast, even for 15 minutes. So we were able to tape this in person in Atlanta, Georgia, Super Bowl weekend. Chris and I talked a little bit about his journey, about manhood, about faith. And one of the things that we got into, because he got married November 27th, 2011, and just a month later, his wife, Keisha, died of lung cancer at a very young age. And they were only just married for a month. They'd been together for a while. But what a tragedy to go through, and what a difficult time for anyone to go through. And Chris talks about that time and how it made him stronger and how it challenged him in his faith. So take a listen. Chris Draft, longtime NFL linebacker, joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's good to talk to you. I was part of this event that's going on here in Atlanta, and got to watch a panel discussion that you were on with some other NFL players. Takeo Spikes, Greg Jennings, and Brian Dawkins and Aeneas Williams were down there as well. Such a great event run by Chris Broussard and the King movement, which I love what they're about and what they're doing. But your answers, your passion, your story really stood out to me, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to just get you here for a few minutes on the podcast to kind of share. Let's start with why you want to get involved in an event like this. Why is an event like this, where you can encourage young men in their faith, so important to you?
Well, why would you want to get involved with it? Ideally, if you're asking me, but if you ask somebody else, if they understand that it's important that we nurture other people, other men, in this particularly other men, and that's not just young men, but older men, that we have to continue to encourage each other, because walking with faith or walking with Jesus is not easy.
No.
And we need encouragement in being able to get that done. And so I think, it worked in my schedule, and I was excited. Troy Vincent had reached out to me. I had a chance to meet with Pastor Brian, and then based on that work, be introduced to Chris Broussard. But the real love of being here is because being able to pour into the young people, old people, and let them know that, hey, we're in this together.
Yeah.
I think we want to say that every day. Just like if I was in a facility, in a practice facility, and it's football, and every day you walk in the room, you're saying, they walk in and say, how you doing? You all right? You good? You good? You good? And I think any time that we can get in a room together and kind of check on each other and say, are you good? Are you good? Yeah. And then remind each other what our purpose is, man, that's always a win.
Yeah, we're not always good, even though we say it. And that's the common thing. How you doing? I'm good. How are you? Are we? Mm-hmm. Are we really? Do we really want to go deeper? I think we do, and I think that's really important for relationships, especially in the body of Christ, to go a little below the surface. Mm-hmm. Why don't you talk a little bit about what your
journey has been like to Christ. There was a great story that you shared out there in the panel that I'd like you to share here about just some work God did in you and the miracle that He's done through you, even in the midst of some pretty difficult circumstances.
Yeah, like as I shared on the panel, I mean, I had a tremendous family in terms of we grew up, knowing Jesus. We did, but not in the church really. We because my folks had grew up and both of them were there all the time, and I guess they saw too much hypocrisy in the places that they were. Yeah. And so it didn't take away their faith, but it took away kind of the faith in the institution that brought them in their faith. And so I was in that space that was challenged to understand Jesus, to know Jesus, to love Jesus. But it wasn't until I went to college where I was on my own, alone more, that I had a chance to really validate that. And I say, and on top of being able to validate it was just a nice reminder, because this is when I first started to get my asthma attacks that put me in the hospital and put me in a situation where every day was an adventure. Yeah. And that the adventure was just waking up and being able to breathe. Yeah. And that's an adventure that has really kind of defined my life. It's a adventure that's made it where I didn't think I was going to play in the NFL, because I didn't think I really would be able to breathe well enough to go and play in the NFL. While I was in the NFL, I was in the hospital 6-7 times because of asthma attacks. And with each one of those, that being able to come back from it was just this blessing that I was able to continue, but also a reminder to take even more out of the game and not take it for granted. Yeah. That I'm here, and it could be great to just be a ball player, and a lot of people, that's good enough for them. But having these asthma attacks were a reminder. It says you're more than a ball player, you're more than a ball player, you're more than a ball player. Yeah. At the same time, I prayed that all the time, but it was the asthma attacks that were that extra reminder that was like, you must be more. You're a man, you got to be this man of God. People have to see you, and that platform should allow them to see that. Right? Yeah. And there has to be a sense of urgency about it, that you can't wait and creep into a room. You got to walk in that room and make sure that they don't just see you and see the stereotypes of a ball player, but you got to break through that, just like you breaking into the room and go and close the gap so that they know. Yeah. Yeah. And I know that for you, Chris, you had some difficult circumstances and the loss of your wife. Can you share a little bit about what you talked about on that panel with that situation and how difficult that was? We talk about love, the love of our people. We talked about how difficult it can be to love somebody, and that to say that, and I shared first as my folks that they gave love and showed love. They didn't say it as much, but they showed it, and that's how we were brought up to really show it. I said, but when you move forward and you because you were shown it as this unconditional love, you can see it when it's not there. And so I was saying that when I finished up playing, my wife was diagnosed with cancer, December of 2010, and then ended up passing a year later. Yeah. So she was diagnosed with lung cancer, a 37-year-old woman in amazing shape, never smoked in her life, and gets diagnosed with lung cancer. What the? Yeah. Now, I could just ask God, what's wrong? How can this happen? How can this happen? But you know what? It happens. Yeah. So we can ask God for the questions of why. We can say, tell us why. Where are the answers of why? Or we can ask God for the plan to move forward. We can thank God for allowing us to be together. And I shared with the group is that people have asked me, and they asked me after my experience with my wife, and do I miss playing football? Do I wish I was still playing football? And again, what did I have to share with them? I said, you know my story. But then you're going to ask me, do I wish I was still playing football? I said, because if I was still playing football, then I wouldn't have been home in December when my wife got diagnosed. Yeah. I wouldn't have been with her. I wouldn't have been able to be this worst day in our lives, not just hers, but our lives. Yeah. I wouldn't have been right there. Yeah. Right? I wouldn't have been with her through this year journey as she's going through it, as she's battling. I wouldn't have been able to see her face find a way to smile. When you're 37 years old and you've got a daggum disease, it's stage 4 lung cancer. It says it's a 5-year survival rate of 18% as a whole, but really in terms of stage 4, that thing is about 0.6%. And she's still finding a way to smile because she's saying, I'm here.
Yeah.
It's a blessing. And regardless of what happens, I've got to find a way to smile. So I got a chance to witness. I got a chance to witness this fight. I got a chance to get married to this beautiful woman in November of 2011. And then I got a chance to be by her side. December 2011.
Tell me about the Chris Draft Family Foundation. And I know that you and her founded that team draft, right?
So we founded, the Chris Draft Family Foundation was founded in 2006. And powering families to live healthy lifestyles. And we founded Team Draft in 2011, this November 27, 2011, on our wedding day.
Yeah.
My wife, came to me before we got married. She said, "What if we don't get presents? What if we, what if we ask our family and friends to support the foundation so that we can fight back?"
Yeah.
And it's so important that people recognize that Team Draft did not start with my continuation of our battle after she passed away. It started with my wife making a commitment, making a choice when we were getting married for it to be about others. Yes, we were going to get married and that was about us, but that it could not. We could make it where it's not just all about us.
Yeah.
It could be an opportunity for us to create witnesses to our commitment to each other, but also witnesses to a commitment to the community.
Yeah.
That's Team Draft, and that's that beautiful thing that I challenge people to make sure that they see her, because it says a commitment and a choice is not easy. Right?
Yeah.
So somebody says, "Chris, it's not easy for somebody to stand up and be an advocate." I said, "I absolutely know that because I saw my wife." "You think, Chris, it's not?" I said, "No, I know it's not, but I know it's absolutely important. I know we have to have it.
Yeah.
I know that it'll happen when somebody's ready, but I absolutely know it's not easy. But then I also absolutely know that it's necessary if we want to change the face of lung cancer."
How is your health? You talked about the asthma and all that. It's 2019 now. You're in your early 40s, we'll say. We'll just leave it at that. Yep. But how is your health right now? How are you doing?
My health is good. In terms of asthma, that's been like kryptonite to me while I was playing. When I was the biggest and the strongest that I've ever been, I could walk outside and somebody's cutting the grass and they put me down, and somebody else is smoking a cigar and sending me to the hospital. Somebody else is on a cigarette. It's part of my journey. That journey that almost had me laid to rest with my wife.
Yeah.
Right. The day that she was laid to rest, December 31st of 2011, went to check on the flowers, went to the florist early in the morning, and the guy, one of the guys that was there, was smoking in the back and ended up having an asthma attack. I actually had to go to the emergency room, so in the emergency room for about an hour and a half, and I told him, I said, "I got to get out because I can't miss my baby's homegoing."
Yeah.
But I barely got out. I barely got out. But that's my journey. Yeah. It's my journey, and I say I'm up to own it, because in owning it means that every day means that much more. All right. And I think that's the energy and spirit to try to put on everyone else is that, and it's easy to say it, and in some ways it can be a cliche that says that every day matters. Yeah. But you truly does, right? But I unfortunately know that one too well, because again, every day I wake up, it's either a good breathing day, or it's a kind of good breathing day, or it's a oh my goodness day, and then the other ones, it's a great breathing day until I walk out the door and there's somebody smoking a cigar, and then everything changes. Let's close it with this. Appreciate your time here, Chris, on the podcast. What's the greatest lesson of encouragement that you can share to our listeners, our audience, mostly sports fans who love Jesus is our audience? You've been through a lot, and God says he works together the good, all things for good for those who are called according to his purpose. So what's the lesson that you can share in all of this that God has taught you in good and in struggle? Man, that's such a great question that you're asking there. What did I learn? And I told people that football prepared me for, and my journey prepared me for what happened with my wife. Okay. Football tells you it can be over at any time. Now, that's not your life, but it's the game, and you have to appreciate that it can be. And if you do appreciate, that means you have to go after it every day, and you have to live it and fight and scratch and claw. And then it makes it where you understand there are things that you can do that will make it give you the best chance for success, but that doesn't mean you're going to have success.
Amen. Yeah.
All right? So I would say we got to pursue it like it's our last day. We got to create a plan that's going to give us our best chance for success. And then the other thing, we've got to celebrate the victory of being there each day.
Yeah. The small victories.
Yeah, it is.
That's it. Appreciate you, Chris Draft, for being here on the podcast. Wish you nothing but the best. Real quick, website people can go and find out more information.
Go to ChrisDraftFamilyFoundation.org, and they can go to TeamDraft.org to see specifically what we're doing in the lung cancer community.
I love it. Chris, thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
And many thanks to Chris Draft, the longtime NFL linebacker, for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Really enjoyed talking to him, and you could just sense that this man has a passion about life, a passion for Jesus, and it really is infectious, right? I mean, when you listen to him, you kind of feel like you want to run through a wall for the guy, and I felt that way for sure, even in just the short time we had, and I look forward to getting him back on the podcast and talking more in depth about his journey to faith in Jesus and kind of walking through all that he's walked through in his life. So thanks to Chris Draft for joining us. Thanks to you for listening. We want to encourage you again to check out our website, sportspectrum.com, where you can become a subscriber and a partner with us and get our magazine, which is a quarterly magazine, for just $18 for an entire year. It gets you our 4 quarterly issues, plus a couple bonus issues. It's a really great magazine. Can't encourage you enough to get it. And it's at an unbelievable deal. It's $18 for the whole year. I mean, think about that. It's a $20 bill. That's what we drop, all week long when we're going to get coffee or just get some snacks or whatever. And this is for a magazine that could literally change people's lives for the gospel, for Jesus, and the story on the intersection of sports and faith. It's really a great magazine. So check it out, sportspectrum.com, and subscribe today. If you'd like to reach us here at Sports Spectrum, you can email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. You can also find us on social media at Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our handle is @sports_spectrum. Take a screenshot, share this podcast, tweet at us, let us know that you heard this podcast and any stories that we're sharing. We'd love to thank you personally. We'd love to also retweet and share whatever you put out on social media regarding Sports Spectrum. So thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate you checking out this podcast and just being an encourager in the work that we're doing here. And our goal is simple: to make disciples of Jesus Christ and go tell the nations about him through the power of sports. It's really that simple, through the motto that's found in John 3:30, he must increase and we must decrease. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day.